what got you into bodybuilding of all things?
It's an interesting story. Um, I wanted to start a gym here in my little local town. I loved training. I loved um, the guys that I followed, and I didn't know that I wanted to get into bodybuilding. I just knew that I wanted to own a gym and that I wanted to teach people and coach people. But as I kind of was going through my early years of my training journey, the people that I were learning from were natural bodybuilders. And so these are guys back in the late 90s they were kind of, in my opinion, gods when it came to natural bodybuilding. They were competing in the NPC and doing really well. One gentleman by the name of Skip LaCour, he's located in San Francisco area, at least I think he still is. He was kind of like my first coach. And then another gentleman by the name of Jeff Willett. These two gentlemen were natural bodybuilders, and I mean, most people accuse them of using drugs, anabolic drugs, because they were so gifted, you know. Yeah, they looked like, they took drugs. And so as I was watching these gentlemen's journeys, they chronicled everything online. And I was like, man, this is a really interesting and kind of compelling watch. I wanted to live that life, for lack of a better term. And my first bodybuilding show and my first prep was in 2003, ironically the same year that my son was born. And it was hard. I made it harder than it needed to be just because I didn't know any better at the time. I had my little menu all laid out. I ate the same thing at the same times every single day. And then from January until June when I competed, I did what my mentors did, basically. I just reduced this meal by this much and reduced that meal by that much. Just weekly, I just made these deductions, and I fell in love with that. And I've obviously evolved since then and made things less harsh. Thank goodness. I may not have been in it as long as I have if I had to do it that harsh way. But that's what really got me into it, was just falling in love with that disciplined lifestyle that, ultimately I felt like made me a better person. And then, of course, the getting on the bodybuilding stage and showing off your muscle and showcasing your hard work was just kind of the bonus on the cake.
Mm. How, so getting into natural bodybuilding, I feel is like you only really get into it when you have like those mentors that have went that route. Before like discovering Skip and Jeff, would you have been interested in the untested side at all? Like even like watching, because like I know like around the time like 2003, that would have been kind of Ronnie Coleman era, wouldn't it have been?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. To be honest with you, through the majority of my bodybuilding exposure from the mid to late 90s, I'm going to sound super naive here, but I didn't know that those bodybuilders used anabolics. You know what I mean? I just thought they were these huge jacked people, And when I first started following Jeff and Skip, I was like, wow, these guys look just like those guys. You know what I mean? Now, obviously, pictures, when you're not seeing pictures side by side, and it's kind of like I follow this person, I see their pictures, and then in a magazine or some other format, I see these pictures of these guys, the differences are more obvious. But when you see them separated like that, you're like, man, they kind of look the same. And so naturally I was like, oh, wow. So these guys are using drugs. These guys are not. These guys kind of look like these guys. I don't got to use drugs. I can kind of do what these guys do. Hence the reason that I kind of started in that harsh manner was because I was seeing what they did and, basically said, okay, well, they do it and they look like that. I'm going to do that. And then someday I will look like that. Did I answer your question much?
Yeah, yeah, you did. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because like, I guess I can definitely see why back then you might also not like really be thinking about the drug aspect because it's completely different era to what it's like now. Like there's people in the untested side, like they talk about their drugs all the time, right? They talk about their cycles and podcasts and put a post with like their exact like stack milligram dosage and everything, right? It's very like openly talked about now, which to be honest I find it kind of funny because it's still illegal in the States. So like I don't think they should really be that open. Fair enough in like places like the UK and stuff like that, where like the like laws are a little bit like looser, but I can see why that would be something like that you think. Because I remember when I was getting into like training, I said that I would not do bodybuilding because I wasn't willing to go that route. Because in my mind, that's the only route there was for bodybuilding. I didn't even know that natural bodybuilding was a thing until I saw an Irish influencer, like one of the first Irish influencers, like post a picture of like Alberto, and he's like, "This is what natural bodybuilding looks like." And I was like, "Natural bodybuilding, like is what do you mean natural bodybuilding? Bodybuilding is just bodybuilding." And then I found out about like the divide and like, okay, that's a way to go. Because I think I don't know if you felt like this, but I just didn't really see myself ever doing bodybuilding because I could never picture myself as like an open bodybuilder on stage. I was like, I don't want to get that big, you know. And then once I discovered natural route, it was like, all right, like I can see myself in that, you know. I can see myself becoming that. Whereas the obviously the IFBB and the Untested just selects for like the elite of the elite, and I'm sure there's plenty of those elite of the elite in the natty ranks too, but a lot of them more often than not just join over to the other side.
Yeah, and that's you kind of hit the nail on the head on what kind of got me into it, because when I started following Skip and Jeff, that made me realize, oh, really, those other guys are using drugs. And so I'm never going to do bodybuilding because A, I don't look like that, and B, it's probably going to take me decades to look like that, you know. And then through Jeff and Skip's platform, they were um, going to competitions. They were coaching people up that they looked they looked natural. They looked like I did, you know. And then I started realizing, oh, well, you know what? There actually is natural bodybuilding competitions, because I was not going to go that route either. I couldn't see myself getting up there and embarrassing myself, 160 pounds and standing next to these guys that were like 280, you know. Um, and then, lo and behold, sure enough, I'm like, oh, there's this NPC Pacific Naturals, which is kind of a quasi-natural. I was like, oh, maybe I could do that. And then through just kind of continued searching, keep in mind the internet was not
Yeah.
anything like it is now. You kind of had to actually work to find these places. I found the INBA, the International Natural Bodybuilding Association, that they actually had natural competitions where there was a polygraph test and, all these kind of loopholes that you had to jump through. And then I was just like, I'm doing it. At that point, you couldn't have talked me out of it. Once I discovered that there is this thing that kind of is more inclusive of guys that are just kind of normal, not the elite.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely, it opens the door a lot more. But I also do think like when you do start competing, like there's still the standard, right? I think like that's one common misconception that a lot of people have with natural bodybuilding. It's just like, oh, all natural bodybuilders are small and like, they're just people who couldn't be like good untested bodybuilders. And to be honest, a lot of that chat just comes from the untested side of things. Whereas, you go to like a WMBF show, like, particularly like amateur shows, even in the IFBB, can often be like quite mixed bag in regards to competitor standard, right? It's just amateur shows that's what they're like, right? But if you look at an IFBB pro show versus like a WMBF pro show, like you're still seeing like the elite of the elite. Like you're seeing guys who like look like mind blowing, like, being at WMBF Worlds. Like that time I went to watch in Seattle, right, just as a spectator, and I was like looking at the pro show, I was like, Jesus Christ, like this is it just blows your mind. Like looking at somebody like Brian DaCosta up on stage, and he has so much muscle. Or what's the other guy, the German guy? I can't remember his name. Tiny waist, huge shoulders. He's only like 21 or something like that, and he won the middles. And it's just
Yes, that was, wasn't it Benjamin Schuster? Because Benjamin Schuster and Frederick Easton, I remember them going at it in the middleweights, and it was just insane
Yeah. Oh
looking
man,
at
some of the
them.
pictures I have on my phone, I'm pretty sure Natty Needs Sadie took the back shot that I took of them because it's just it's another level.
It is. You're right.
And when you see that, it's inspiring because then you're standing beside him, right? Like that. Even when we went out to dinner and standing beside Frederick, and like we're the same height. He doesn't look that big in his
Mm-hmm.
clothes, but then
Mm-hmm.
obviously underneath, it's just like wow. And I think that's obviously a nice thing to a degree about being a natural bodybuilder as an open bodybuilder in the IFBB, even if you're not like one of the top guys, I'm sure it gets a little bit uncomfortable when you're like 250 pounds. You're wearing your 5XL jumper and you're going to like the shop or you're going to a restaurant and you're just trying to mind your own business and people are like, what is that over there? Which I'd say it's nice at the start for your ego, but then over time it can become a bit, you know, man, I get anxiety if that was me, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess a question here it'd be interesting to know what that first prep actually looked like, right? Because obviously prep approaches have changed so much now. So I'm curious to hear how your first one went, what the type of protocols you're following are, like anything silly in hindsight you did, how the recovery process looked. Oh, keen to hear that.
Yeah. Well, on the training front, I did exclusively what's called maximum overload training. And it was a training system that was coined by AST Sports Science. They're a supplement company that sponsored Jeff and Skip, ironically. And it's basically, when you break it down, it's just basically a body part split. You've got a chest day, a back day, leg day, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a one time a week frequency on each of your body parts. That good old fashioned body part split that all of us probably followed for a long time. And I did that all the way through prep. And the thing that I liked about Max OT was that you actually had a system in place of what we coin now progressive overload. When you were able to get 6 repetitions on any of your exercises, you went up in weight. And then you basically just kind of stayed at that weight until you were able to get 6 repetitions again. I followed that all the way through. Now, looking at that in hindsight, um, I probably shouldn't have trained that heavy, you know? I mean, when you're reaching failure between 6 and 8 repetitions, that's a pretty heavy load. And luckily or unluckily, I guess depending on how you look at it, luckily for me, I was still kind of in my very late novice phases of training. Um, and so I was actually able to somewhat progress all the way through prep, but it was basically just because I was, you know, a novice, for lack of a better term. Um, but it was really discouraging at the end when I was like, 2, 3% body fat, striated glutes, things declined at the end. And that was super discouraging, you know what I mean? But it didn't matter. I was bound and determined to do it. I just kind of ground myself into the dust. And I'll be honest with you, after that show, I was not about to do another show. I was done. I was finished. In fact, really, I wasn't even sure that I was going to do bodybuilding anymore after that, because
Mm.
I literally just kind of ground myself into the dust. Now, I did very well. In fact, I showed up and people were just, their eyes were popping out of their head. They had, in natural bodybuilding, they had not really seen striated glutes before. And can you keep in mind, this was back in 2003. Um, and so that kind of motivated me the following year. But that year, like, I had a couple people, oh, you got to come to Sacramento and do this show. You would do really, really well. And I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm done. One and done for me. So that was kind of on the training side. I can't remember if it was that prep or my second prep where I did what was called max OT cardio, which basically just meant all out 10 minutes on a recumbent bike as fast as you could go for the entire 10 minutes. Um, and
I'd
I
say you're not
think
going
that,
very fast by the end.
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it just destroyed your legs. It really did. And I think I did do that my first prep in 2003. But yeah, weight training in the morning, cardio in the evening, weekends off. That's kind of what it looked like. You would do it on a recumbent bike. You would not run. You would not do an elliptical or anything like that. Just all out, 10 minutes as fast as you could go on the recumbent bike. And then on the nutrition front, it was just like I said, I made myself a menu that was kind of crazy to think about. I think it was 10 or 12 meals. Now, like in the pre-workout, it was like a scoop of protein powder and a scoop of like this dextrose creatine mixture. That was the meal. And then you had that afterward, you know what I mean? And then an hour after that, you had a meal replacement pack, MRP, meal replacement pack, and you mix that up. But the thinking behind that at the time was every time you eat, you get this digestion, you get a little surge in metabolism, and so therefore your body fat is your lipolysis is accelerated after that. That was the thinking at the time. So the more times you eat,
Yeah.
you're kind of constantly in this fat burning environment, right? And yeah, like I think another meal was like an apple in a protein shake, you know. But I was like 10 or 12 times a day that I was feeding myself. And so the way that the caloric reduction happened was, okay, now I'm going to cut down to half of a scoop of protein powder pre-workout, you know. I'm going to take the apple, I'm going to cut it in half. I'm going to have half of an apple. You know, I did have some chicken and broccoli, you know, and the broccoli just was kind of always in place, but now I'm going to take this 8 ounces of chicken, I'm going to cut it down to 4. And every week I would make this deduction of food from one of the meals until basically you got right up to peak week. And that's what the protocol looked like back in that very, very first prep. It was always the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, look, if it worked, it worked. You know, it probably wasn't the most efficient way for you to do things, but that's why you have those experiences, isn't it? It's like you learn from those experiences and like how to do things better. I'm sure, like you prepped in it's 2024, wasn't it?
I prepped both 2024 and 2025. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and tell me this now. Like, in contrast, what did the nutrition look like then? Were you still doing 10 to 12 meals?
Yeah, not at all. No. And arguably I matched my conditioning in 2024 at the age of 53 years old that I did it in 2003 when I was 37, 38 years old. The physique looked different, obviously. I mean, you can't let almost, 20 years go by there and not look a little bit different. But yeah, the conditioning was pretty darn close. That prep, obviously, dramatically different, right? We're talking 4 meals a day. Um, One of those meals could have been kind of classified as a snack, you know. I'm a very kind of a regimented, kind of a structured guy, and as I've gotten older, I find a lot of efficiency in that. I can get things done with less thinking, and it flows a lot easier, you know, and I can I'm more efficient. I can just get things done. So my 10 to 12 meal approach, I was very regimented. I followed that. It was, people at work they would set their clock by, oh, here comes Brad heating up his chicken and broccoli. Must be 2 o'clock, you know? So that stayed in place, but it was just kind of like, okay, I'm up in the morning. I'm doing my little ritual. I have my protein shake and my coffee, you know, get that down, go train, come right back, get my next meal in. Usually that meal post-training and then my meal at night were my 2 biggest meals, because the one thing that I did not have in my first prep, and really a lot of my early preps, I was never full. I was basically just always hungry, you know? And so after probably about 2011, then I started kind of having these bigger meals where I actually got a full stomach. And so, I would have these 2, what I would consider snacks by most standards. And then I would have these 2 big meals where I got a nice full stomach.
Mm.
And when it comes to tracking macros, I really didn't track macros at all until the last 7 weeks of prep. I tracked calories, and I was mindful of what my protein was. But when I tracked my calories, I mean, I was super loose. If I had a handful of, strawberries, I wouldn't track that. If I ate a carrot with my coffee in the morning, which, I mean, I don't have the best vision, so I'm thinking carrots are good for vision. You know, I have carrot every morning. Wouldn't track that, you know. It wasn't until that last 7 weeks when Jeff Alberts, our godfather, he kind of took the reins as my coach. He says, okay, I want you tracking everything from now on. But I mean, I was doing things like, you know, it's a pain to scan things with your app on your phone. You know what I mean? So a lot of times I would just, if I was not having my usual, you know, chicken that was in my app, I would just use the chicken in my app until it matched the calories of the meat that I was eating there, and then just punch it in there. You know? So that's how loose I was. But it got me into condition, you know,
Yeah.
it got
Yeah.
me to the powerlifting platform. I made the 75 kilo class. And then 7 weeks later, you know, I was arguably matching the conditioning that I'd had in my 30s. So same end result, much different path that was walked.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking if you were letting things like carrots and strawberries slip out of the tracking, I'm like, probably not adding too much to the whole caloric load there anyway, considering like the mostly water, fiber as well. So you're
Hmm.
like, grand. But Brad, coffee with a carrot, that's the combination I've never heard in my life. If it was coffee and a donut, I'd be like, okay, coffee and carrot, there you go. So yeah, like you competed in powerlifting and bodybuilding in the same year, right? Like obviously I know I did that too. It was completely different because I did that well before I even started prep. You kind of did like the powerlifting meet like kind of during the prep, right?
Yeah, I did that both in 2024 and 2025.
Yeah. How was the training for that? Like how was the experience of it? Because obviously, you're a lot lower in body fat, things are gonna feel a little bit kind of strange.
Yeah, yeah. And it's the prep was not flawless. I mean, what powerlifting preps are flawless? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you're always kind of dealing with something. But in that first year, 2024, I wanted to cut weight to get down to the 75 kilo class because that's where I usually compete the best. And so I just started, that was my first intent, was to get to that 75 kilo class. And I think I needed to lose it was not more than about 7 kilos that I had to lose. And that was actually pretty darn easy, really, to be honest with you. I just kind of, like I said, I just kind of followed the approach. I made sure that my tracked calories, I never got over 2,000. And then with my training, it was very powerlifting traditional. You know what I mean? It was kind of like a top single and back downs on squat, top single and a back down on benches, accessories. You know, some days didn't have back downs. Some days just had just a top singles. Some days were sub maximal, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And it wasn't really until I got below, I'm gonna have to use pounds here because
Okay.
I speak the metric system, but I don't think that way. It wasn't until I got below 170 pounds. So that would have been like what, 77 kilos, something like that, maybe. That is when things really kind of started to kind of go amok, you know, because my recovery was just not as good. I was getting a little bit more fragile. I'm a big boned guy. I mean, even at like 2% body fat, I cannot squeeze myself into 31-inch jeans because my pelvis is so wide. It's really obvious on the bodybuilding stage. You know, when you see these guys with these little tiny waists up there, and then mine's like, it looks like it's literally like a half a foot wider.
Mm.
That those bones really stick out there. So I should not really be that body weight lifting that way. But I just kind of checked my ego at the door. I had an injury in my shoulder. I sprained my infraspinatus, and I was like, you know what? You got to show up to compete. Let's just stop doing what you think you can do, what you know you could do under normal circumstances in the gym, and let's just get the training done. You know what I mean? And let's get on the platform. You know, and it turned out great. I got second. It was at the Masters Naturals in Memphis, Tennessee. I should say the USAPL. I consider them
Yeah.
the Natural Drug Tested
Yeah.
Federation. USAPL Masters World Cup is what it was, a Masters World Cup. And then after that was when I started my my bodybuilding prep with Jeff. So obviously at that point there, the only thing that really stayed was a decline bench press, because then I was the only bench press I could do. No barbell squat, pendulum squat, no deadlift off the floor, RDL. Just overhauled my entire training and got basically totally away from powerlifting and just very, very bodybuilder, kind of at that point. And it worked out pretty darn good, obviously. I got on stage with a lot of muscle for a 54-year-old guy.
Mm. You won
And then
was it 2024 or 2025 you won your division at Muscle Mayhem?
actually, believe it or not, it was both of them,
Oh,
Shane.
okay.
So yeah, in
I keep
2024,
track these years just all form into one.
in 2024, there wasn't a lot of 50-year-olds that showed up. So what they did is they basically just put all the 40, 50, and 60-year-olds on stage. And I won that, got qualified for Worlds. And then last year, 2025, there was a good amount of 50-year-olds that showed up, and I won that and got qualified for Worlds again. And then, of course, went on to Worlds and got second at Worlds last year. So, yeah, I mean, I was pretty proud of those accomplishments at this age,
Man, it is incredible because like I know leading up to both of those, like you've had like a number of different injuries pop up over the year, right? Over the years, right? Like I remember when you were coaching me, you mentioned one of your check-ins. You're like, I'm not really going to be able to speak in this week's check-in because after breaking my jaw because the barbell landed on your face or something
On
like that.
my
I'm like,
jaw, exactly, yeah.
that's fairly understandable. uh, but like, I guess like a question for you here is, how have you been able to like navigate all those and work around them? Like I know you're right now you're navigating like a pulled bicep, right? So like how
hmm
do you manage to like stay positive when those type of things pop up? Because they're different to I've got a bit of elbow tendonitis or like I've tweaked my back. Like these are things that are like bone breaks or tears. Like I'm curious to know how your mindset works around them, and then how you essentially like kind of triage your training to make adjustments.
You have to kind of let go of a lot of insecurities. How many people, when they have an injury like that, most of us, and I'm guilty of this too, we'll just find a way to train through it, right? Which oftentimes makes it worse, and then of course you have to stop training altogether. And so with me, I just I let go of a lot of those insecurities. It's like I don't have to do, like right now with this torn bicep on the left side. I'm not doing any curls. I'm not doing any curls, and I'm not doing any rows or pull downs because it's that stretched, elongated position that hurts. And as soon as I start flexing it, that's right there, and that where the tear is where it hurts. I'm not doing any of that. So I am doing my squat. I am doing my bench press. I am doing triceps. I am doing calves. That's really about the extent of it. I'm doing different variations of squats. One day I do my low bar squat. Another day I do a Zercher squat. Um, Obviously, load management is got to happen when you're doing things multiple times a week that way. But I'm just not doing any curls. I'm not doing any curls and any rows to speak of. And I know I'm going to be fine. My biceps are not just going to shrivel up and go away. The muscle on my back is not just going to melt off. And I know at some point I'm going to be able to start doing those again. Now, luckily, I've got the experience that I've done this already on the right side. But even when I did that on my right side, I didn't have that guarantee. You know what I mean? I just did the same thing. I did everything but what hurt it. So with that being said, one of the things that has really kind of motivated me now to just kind of keep at it, I met a very gifted power lifter at last year's Arnold Sports Fest. I was coaching my client, Dave Brown, and he ended up winning, but his closest competition was this gentleman that I'm going to talk about. His name was Dwayne. He was 61 years old. Guy was he could easily whoop me and everybody at Worlds if he was a bodybuilder. And he just basically, I talked to him. I says, man, I says, you're still in the game. I says, you're still, lifting some super respectable weights at 61. Kind of what's your secret? And he just looked at me and he goes, don't ever stop lifting. He said, I don't care if you just got to get in the gym and you just do leg extensions and tricep extensions. He says, I've had to do that at times. Just don't stop lifting, you know. And here, this guy, I mean, he's 61 years old, and I mean, he's got a lot of muscle for a 61-year-old. And if he's done that at times, he still looks great, you know. So that kind of helped a lot of my insecurities as far as knowing my muscle's not going to go anywhere as long as I'm training and doing what I can do, you know, and not try to just train through it. Because I've done that before, just tried to train through it. And, you know, usually just it kind of beats you down to where it's like you just mentally give up and you don't want to train anymore because you're always in pain, you know. So that's kind of been the mindset that has really gotten me through, you know, injuries and things like that. Now, triaging things, I have learned a lot from we have a PT on staff. His name is Nick Licamelli. And I've learned a lot about how physical therapists and physios treat injuries. And kind of what it all boils down to is it's exposure therapy. Exposure therapy through, you know, kind of training something that kind of aggravates the injury just a teeny bit and then backing it off and then getting away from it and then going back to it. And it's the way that a lot of PTs will explain it is kind of like coming over a fear of snakes, right? If I'm deathly afraid of snakes and you plop a snake down here in front of me, I'm gonna freak out, right? But, you know, if I put a picture of a snake over there on the wall, it might freak me out a little bit, but I can tolerate it. You know what I mean? It's sitting over there. I'll just do my thing, you know, and then pretty soon after a week or two, I kind of move it a little bit closer and then just kind of move the picture till it's right here in front of me, you know. And then we graduate, put a terrarium over there with a snake in it. Yeah, it'll freak me out a little bit at first, but then I just keep moving that closer and closer and closer through exposure therapy until the terrarium of the snake is right here in front of me. And then I put the snake over there without the terrarium. So like right now with this bicep tear, just this week, I just started doing like little shortened range of motion curls, right? I know it's not the most optimal thing. We know that, you know, the evidence is super compelling that the lengthened portion is the where the money is, but I can't do that right now. What I can do is this. And the first time that I did that, I got about 5 reps in. I was doing body weight. It's kind of like an inverted, kind of a row, kind of a curl type thing. I got 5 reps into it. It hurt. Did 1 more rep, stopped. Waited 2-3 days. Could do that no problem. It didn't hurt at all. So the next time that I do it, now I'm just going to go a little bit more lengthened. It'll probably hurt a couple times. You know what I mean? Then I'll do the shortened range again and then get away from it. A couple days later, go a little bit more lengthened. Maybe I'll get more repetitions in it, but eventually I'm going to be able to go all the way to the full lengthened position. And then I know, okay, now at this point, I can probably do rows and pull downs and maybe some light curls, you know what I mean? But that's kind of how I treat almost any little strain or injury that I've got. I figure out what I can do that just kind of hurts it just a little bit. Then I get away from it. And then I go back and I do it again another couple, 2-3 days later. Find that I can usually do that and a little bit more before it hurts. Get away from it. Go back and do that, again. And just through exposure therapy pretty soon. I mean, I've actually rehabbed strains like that in like 4 or 5 weeks. You know what I mean? To where it's like I had to cut my load down on X lift 75% and I'm back to it again in 4 or 5 weeks at the same load that I was when I left. To me, that seems extremely fast,
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I triage things and how I treat them.
You're essentially conditioning your nervous system to understand that those positions are like safe again. Like you have to go through that process like one way or another. Like it's unreasonable to just be like, I can't, like, so right now can't do bicep curls like really at all except for this like more kind of short range partial. So I'm just not going to do them at all and just wait until my bicep is completely ready. I'm just going to go straight to a preacher curl.
Yeah.
That would be just asking for trouble. And I think that's unfortunately a route that a lot of people take when they are injured, right? They don't have the mentality of like, I'm just going to work around this whatever way I can. I'm going to do what I can. they just decide, I'm going to take time off the gym now, give myself time to rest, and then come back to it. And again, they just like they re-injure themselves because
Mm-hmm.
while yes, rest may help, like have like maybe some irritation, inflammation die down, like not only is like that area not getting like stimulation to recover, like or like blood flow into it, the rest of you is also getting weaker, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
everything else is detraining, and now you have to go through the process of retraining everything else. You
Yep.
know, so it's
Yep.
a very slippery slope to get it down to with injuries. And like, well, like obviously I've listened to podcasts with Nick, and like, I've had some other physios on this podcast too, and like, they all have kind of similar approaches, similar kind of outlooks. Well, unfortunately, the physio world is also just we just call it physios over this side of the pond. Physio world is just full of charlatans also who will just like tell you just that you need like spinal realignment or adjustments or massages, or you need to come see me every single week
Mm-hmm.
to fix you, right? Like as if you're broken. Um, so yeah, I think like hearing that from you, right? Like again, you're not a physical therapist, but you've had all these things that you've worked through over your couple of decades of experience. You're coming at this with like wisdom that's backed up with like what physical therapists, physios actually do in practice and how it works. And personally, that's how I work around my own injuries and how I help my own clients with theirs too. And because it works, right? And
Mm-hmm.
what's the alternative? Do nothing.
Exactly.
That's
Yep.
so.
Yep. Exactly. And that's a lot of times what we just have to, that's the insecurity that you have to let go of. Is it's like, well, if I can't do curls, I'm just not going to train at all. you know, or the worst thing is, well, I'm just going to go ahead and do a certain kind of curl that I know that I can do with a little bit of pain. And it's like, well, that's not really doing the whole healing aspect of that exposure therapy of overcoming that either, because eventually, as we all know, that starts to hurt. So,
Yeah, yeah. Especially suffering the elbows. Once I hit 30, like I'm 32 now, but like once I hit 30, I didn't understand it until like I've got to this age, and I'm still not that old, but like I always hear people say, "Oh, wait till you hit 30, you'll have those joints start calling out to you during your training." I'm like, that won't happen. But now it's like either my elbows or my knees, like it's either one of them in a session.
yeah, yeah.
Father time comes for us all. Um, I guess like one thing that I think is kind of on a similar kind of loop to this is you have scoliosis, right? Has your experience with like kind of like training with that like allowed you to maybe navigate those circumstances also? Because I guess um there's probably different considerations that you have to think about when you are like programming for deadlifts or programming for squats or having them in the same sessions. How do you navigate that, or like find any kind of contraindications with your training?
Well, I mean, first of all, I have to say that I'm pretty darn lucky because with the scoliosis that I've got, and even worse than that, is I was born with a very, very mild version of spina bifida. My L5 vertebrae never closed. It's like an open in the back. And so as a result, one of my vertebrae, the L5 vertebrae, is slipped forward on S1. It's called a spondylolisthesis. And for most people, that is like debilitating to the point that they need to have surgery, have that reduced, and then put hardware in there to keep it there. You know what I mean? It's just, I mean, that's probably just through the grace of God that I have been, for the most part, pain free. And the scoliosis, yeah, I'm just kind of crooked. If you ever watch me squat, when I come up, the bar kind of dips on the right side before I
Yeah.
make it all the way up to the top. But yes, there's certain considerations that I do have to take because, like, for example, my preferred competition deadlift is sumo. And with my stance that wide, it really pulls on the hip flexors and the adductors, which, indirectly those kind of tie into the bottom of that sacrum and L spine kind of through the pelvic floor. So what I've had to find is that I can deadlift 2 or 3 times a week, but I've got to kind of vary the type of deadlift, and B, load management is super important. You know what I mean?
Mm.
A lot of folks think that they can't do a specific lift multiple times a week due to lack of a recovery. Well, it's usually not so much that as it's just a load management issue. You can't do your low bar squat with 85, 90, 95% 3 times a week. But I bet you can find if you replace that a couple of times with, either a different squat or something that's like 60%, you probably could find that you could do that, So those are the kind of considerations that I have to, consider. And again, just let go of the insecurities. I don't have to do my competition deadlift 3 times a week. I can do that now once a week and then do like a trap bar deadlift. I can hit my top single and some back downs here. On this day here, I just got to do some rep work. You know what I mean? Kind of vary it through periodization techniques like that to where it's like I can stay in the game, make steps without making it arguably what would be optimal, but then I start kind of falling backward in a way.
Yeah. A lot of it really does come back to load management for almost anything. And I think, like, regardless of scoliosis or not, like, for, like, myself, right, like, has to be mindful of, like, how you're loading different positions and what you find you can recover from in each session. Because there's a time in my life where during lockdowns, I was able to squat 4 times a week, and it's deadlifting. I was doing 2 main deadlifts on the RDL, and I was doing lots of accessories and stuff like that alongside. And I progressed quite well. Then when I was in Canada, I went to do 3 times a week squatting again, and there's no way I could do it. Like, I was just like, this is impossible. So like, it obviously changed over time, of course. Like, naturally, one time I wasn't as strong, and the next time I was stronger. So like, obviously your progression also dictates like what you can handle from a recovery perspective. And I think it's one thing you see as well with people like trained bodybuilders, right? Like, how often do you see the person who is a seasoned pro, and they're doing what looks to be like very low volume? They do like 1 to 2 working sets, but they're getting a lot out of it, right? Like, the efficacy of that set is like so much more potent than the 4 sets the newbie does, right? The advanced person is getting like 10 effective reps essentially from their set, whereas it's taken the beginner 4 sets to get 2 effective reps on each of them, so it's one of those kind of situations.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, Shane, that's kind of something that's kind of kept me in the game, is just what you're talking about, making more of your repetitions quality instead of stacking up that quantity. You know what I mean? Because I've kind of gone both ways, is what you're talking about. Kind of doing 4 sets of the pull downs with that kind of hip, kind of hitch hinge, kind of a momentum use into it, to where just doing 2 sets of just strict, all on my back and my biceps pull downs. And I find that because those reps are more effective, I felt like the targeted muscle was worked better than doing 4 sets of the kind of more sloppy form. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Plus, obviously, with sloppier form, you can use a lot more weight, right? Because you do have a lot of momentum to it. And a lot of times that is what kind of ends up leading to injury, because you're kind of in these kind of vulnerable, precarious positions when you kind of make that catch, kind of to use the Olympic term there. Where if you're never there to begin with, and it's just all the muscle that's doing the work, now you're in a less precarious position, and you don't have as much load when you're in, if you were to get in that precarious position, So yeah, kind of really bringing down my volume and making my sets and my reps more effective has been one of the things that I feel like has allowed me to stay in the game and not get injured, so much. I'm arguably less injured now than I was back in my early, 40s, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Would you say some of that is also like down to some of like your learnings? Like, obviously it's learnings across like the last fucking 2 decades, but like I find like definitely in the last couple of years it's spoken of way more. Like, when I was getting into trainers absolutely no discussion around load management. Like
Mm-hmm.
injuries are just something that happened because your technique was bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess like has this been more of like a recent pivot in like the last couple of years, or was this something that came on like maybe earlier on?
I would say that I'm over the last couple of years, I'm the best ever that I've been at it. But really, to be honest with you, this is something that I started doing probably, shoot, 4 years ago. It might have even been longer. I'm trying to think when it was that I was really just kind of slowing down on my eccentrics. Because that was when the things were looking super compelling that, when you were going through that eccentric as opposed to just letting it go, there was some significant gains that you could get from that. You know what I mean? And I want to say that that might have been like pre-COVID, pre-lockdown days. So that could have been like 6, 7 years ago. But boy, when I first started doing it, I sucked. I mean, I was slapping myself on the back of the hand all the time, because oh crap, I lost my composure and I sped that one up. Um, but it was kind of through that evolution of you know what, if I slow down this eccentric, I got to lighten it up. I cannot do as heavy as I was before. And with a lighter load and slowing down that eccentric, it felt more effective. Like I had more DOMs when I first started doing it. The just the muscle seemed worked harder, you
Yeah.
know, with a lighter load and through lengthening, I mean, through slowing down that eccentric, that lengthening portion. So then,
Mm.
of course, the natural thinking is, well, you know what? It's not so much load that needs to happen. It's kind of the effort that needs to happen, you know?
Yeah.
And so then I kind of found out that, well, you know what? I can make one or two of we'll just take, for example, my bench press, because that's the easiest one to kind of to visualize that slow repetition. I can make it look like a 1 rep max. I just use a lighter load and I just keep doing repetitions until I get to that one.
Mm.
The effort is the same as doing a 1 rep max, and arguably they look the same. Like if you were just to take that one out in isolation, they look the same, but now it doesn't hurt as much because it's a lighter load. You know what I mean? And it feels just as effective as the 1 rep max, because fatigue is accumulated and whatnot. So it was kind of this nice, and it was about the same time that we started seeing all of the compelling evidence from, Milo Wolf and all these guys that were talking about the lengthened portion of the repetition being so beneficial that it kind of was the evidence that I needed of that observation of using lighter loads to get the same effort. You know what I mean? And then that's when I found out, well, you know what? I actually can do things multiple times a week. It's just that to get that same effort, I got to be more creative. I got to do cluster sets, with shorter rest periods, or like I was talking about, I got to slow the eccentric kind of way down, force myself to use these lighter loads and get to that same effort. But then, of course, periodize, get in there that work that that needs to happen to get your strength up. Now I'm not doing that 3 times a week. I'm getting the same look, but I'm doing it with different loads and different approaches. I kind of got on a tangent there, but that's what led me to load management.
Well, like that's the whole like one of the biggest benefits of training for muscle gains is that it is so flexible. Like we had Derek Van Avery on the podcast there. He's one of Brian Miner's clients. He recently brought out a paper called it's like load induced mechanisms of hypertrophy, and like talk about like myths and misconceptions. And like one of the big things you talk about within the podcast is just how many different ways there are to grow muscle and just to achieve that like high level of effort as you mentioned there, right? It's not as if you're it's not as if you're like during the set just thinking about making it hard, or thinking about making it look hard. You are trying to reach the point at which the muscle is just simply no longer to exert as much force to overcome the load.
Mm-hmm.
That takes work to get there. So yeah, for sure, doing like a heavy set is like is efficient because you don't have to go through those like kind of like inconsequential reps, you could call it, at the start, right? The very very easy reps to get there, but they're not always practical. Like definitely like when I'm working around like sort of my nagging knee or my nagging elbows, I I look at like increasing the rep ranges. I look at like changing slightly different arm positions, or just modifying, like even using something like BF4, for example, right?
Hmm.
These are
Hmm.
great tools to help you to manage load and to move the dial a little bit. And I think yeah, it's definitely something when I was naive to when I was younger, because I was so fresh and I just felt indestructible because of the way I could train. And it's something I see in a lot of younger people now today too, because there is so much of an obsession with like lifting really heavy. It's like back when I was getting in training, right? It was like yeah, if you had a big squat and big deadlift and big bench, that was like, mind blowing. Now it's like who can do 8 plates on a T-bar row, or who can do 3 plates on a gym pin on a leg extension, and you're seeing the kids doing it, and like they have like a seatbelt on, there's straps fucking there, got a helmet on and a bleeding fucking mouthpiece, and you see them like their hips are nearly bit to rise up, only for the fact that they are strapped in, and like fair enough, you're lifting a heavy load, but you're kind of doing powerlifting on a machine, and powerlifting on a machine that's such the amount of direct force directed towards one particular area. It's like that's definitely not like a way that's going to create longevity. It's going to make your training really fun for now, but like yeah, from a longevity perspective, I think the older you get, the more you become like full stacking a machine or something like that. Like I don't care for it at all anymore. A fun goal to have, right? Because that drive is inside you. Otherwise, you wouldn't go to the gym if we didn't want to get like the next plate on a leg press, or like to get to the next plate on the stack or full stack. But like you get to a point where you're like, I want to get there when it happens, because I simply need to use that load to get the adaptation versus chasing that load. And that's even something I had to realize recently with doing my leg extension, right? Like to come back to the kid strapping himself in. But like I was using a load that was just like maybe 20 kilos heavier than I was meant to. I was like, I don't even like this exercise anymore. My left knee just killing me every single time I sit into it. I was watching a reel that John Jewett, he's on FB Pro, he had up, and he was doing like less weight than me, and his quads are 3 times the size, if not 4 times the size. And he was like, just focus on the contraction through the entire rep. I started doing that, and I was like, with 30 kilos less, I'm like, my legs feel like they're getting so much more out of it, right? And then when these don't hurt me anymore,
Yeah.
and like
And your quads are working actually more now than they were.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and as well, because you're not in pain and you're not like feeling discomfort, well, now your next exercise is a lot easier to get into. You're not dreading it, right? So there's all these like little kind of side benefits, but like anything within this endeavor, you have to kind of make those mistakes, I think, initially, to kind of know they're not worth it. Like I think every lifter goes through their ego lifting phase, and that's completely fine. The main thing is that you don't, number one, have it last the entirety of your lifting career, and number two, when you do get injured, don't like sack off the gym or just go straight back to doing that once you repair
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. Because that's the unfortunate thing, is that many a lifter that goes through that ego lifting phase where they're, plating stacks with with different pins and moving just, huge dumbbells. When they can't do that anymore, they quit. And you'll see some very gifted physiques on people that, because they refuse to let go of their attachment to being the big strong guy in the gym, they just quit. And it's a very sad thing, in my opinion, because if they would have came to that realization, and again kind of let go of those insecurities, they probably would have found that, you know what, you're probably going to look the same, and you're going to still be in the gym if you can just lose that title, lose that attachment that you have to being the big strong guy that's always using the 50-kilo dumbbells, and always putting 10 plates on the leg press, and things like that. Yeah, it's a really sad thing, because I mean, weight training is just such a fun thing to do, and it really it's kind of one of those things that I feels like it builds character through
Mm.
doing hard things.
Yeah. Yeah, there has to be some kind of like death of the ego. It's something I experienced when I did my prep for sure in 2022, because like obviously I went from like a high of, you know, competing at Irish Nationals and hit a big milestone total, and then like I remember my first, I think it was the first like session after prep had completely finished, and I was like, I'm going in to do bench press, and I was like struggling with 90 kilos. Like I was like, how did I go from like lifting 160 kilos on the platform to struggling with 90 kilos? Like probably hadn't struggled with that type of weight since I was like fucking 17.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's that, but then there's also, you know, now that I'm back doing bodybuilding, it's like I'm no longer the person who's coming to the gym and people are looking at when they're lifting. It's like before, when I do my last competition prep, you know, it would be common occurrence as strongest person in the gym, right? So people would look at me squatting, benching, deadlifting, and like now they don't. And but I'm okay with that, because I know I have my own personal achievements, and I don't come into the gym to be a spectacle for other people either. Um, but that just comes with maturity. And I'm sure if it was like 10 years prior, that would feel a lot tougher for me. Whereas like
Hmm.
if I'm doing, there's a shoulder press machine in my gym, and I see people on Instagram doing like fucking 4 or 5 plates in it, even 6, and I'm struggling with 2. I'm struggling with 2, and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, but I've got no issue with it, because I'm like, this is bodybuilding. Like nobody gets on stage and says
Yes.
how many plates you shoulder pressed. Again, like when I was doing that prep in 2022, I was talking to some of the guys backstage, I think at the UK finals, and we were just talking about training, and I was like, I'm struggling with all these guys, like just from talking to the training, but like they looked better. Like that's the goal, right? It's not like
Yeah.
how much can you lift, how good do you look, and like if you can do that doing sets of 20, 25 with the 5 kilo dumbbells, and you can get a good response versus the guy who's trying his life to curl at 25s, you know, it's much for muchness. The guy who looks better is going to win.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Yeah, and it's funny that you talked about like all the different ways that you can get the hypertrophy stimulus, because we just recorded a podcast yesterday for Team 3D Muscle Journey talking about just that. The subject was periodization. But I mean, ultimately, with bodybuilding, it almost kind of comes down to you don't really need to periodize. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you just need to get the volume to the proximity to failure that you need, and then just let the rest of it just kind of flow, you know? Because there is so many different ways to get that end result. You know, we've just talked about one of them right here. Yeah, you can struggle like mad to, curl that 25 kilo bell. And, in a parallel universe, you're that same guy, but you're doing the much harder repetitions with the 5 kilo dumbbell, and yet you both look the same. You know, and that's just two avenues. It's kind of like we've probably got multiple dozen ones in between there as well. And that's one of the in my opinion, the very liberating things about bodybuilding is it's like with powerlifting, well, you can't, or don't want to squat, bench, or deadlift. Well, then tough. If you want to compete, you got to do those. You know what I mean? Whereas in bodybuilding, it's just kind of like, oh, okay, well, I'm kind of tired of doing squats, and in today's day and age, it's such a marvelous thing. We walk into a gym and there's a hack squat and a pendulum squat and a swing squat, and then there's a barbell squat, and then you got front squats. There's like 90 different ways to do a squat now.
Yeah.
That is very liberating as well.
Mm. Yeah, look, when I was living in Canada, the gym I was training in, they literally had 20 different leg presses, like just 20 different leg presses. Then they had however many other hack squats, leg
Hmm.
extensions, like just stuff like you wouldn't even really think of. Which
Yeah,
is just like, if I don't like this leg press, well, this leg press feels great. And like, it's obviously you don't have the option like that in every single gym that you
yeah.
walk into, but it's nice to have when you have it. You did mention periodization there, and I guess like the periodization for hypertrophy, it's like from my side of things, it's like you just periodize things as your preferences almost kind of change to a degree to keep yourself interested. Because
Hmm.
like it's the application of all of these, of that like high level effort sets over the long term, that's driving the outcome. And if that means that, okay, one, for maybe 12 weeks, I'm doing 8 to 12 on this exercise. The next 12-week block, I'm going to do 6 to 10, something like that, right? If that was a type of periodization that just allowed you to set new numbers, set new goals, maybe break a plateau, like, I mean, that's all the periodization you need, because it's not like as you said, powerlifting where you need to peak on a specific day, where that timeline and that like structure really does matter, and the specificity matters that a little bit more. Hypertrophy is not a specific adaptation because there's so many different things that can lead to it, right? So
Yep.
the field is wide open.
Yep, for sure. In fact, we talked about that yesterday. We talked about really when you're periodizing for bodybuilding, we talk about in our hypertrophy course on 3dmusclejourney.com, there's really three things that you need to have, the three pillars, to get the most out of your training. Your training has to be enjoyable, flexible, and realistic. Those are the three things you want to periodize between. You know what I mean? So if your training that you're doing right now is not very realistic just because of the season of life that you're going into, you know, you're getting married pretty soon. Or, pretty sure. You haven't gotten married yet, have you?
Yeah.
You know, during that season of life, you might have to periodize into a sort of training that is super fast. You're getting in there, you got all your tools on the table to get that training in and out of there so that you're home and make your wife happy, or your soon-to-be wife, so that you can get ready for the wedding. You know, your periodization almost has to go through these phases and these periods, right? With things that happen in life. You know, I'm not wanting to do my squat anymore. Well, that's not very enjoyable. Let's go ahead and use these other tools and periodize into this system using these machines and, you know, these things. And those are the three things that you kind of need to think about when you're doing your periodization, as opposed to periodizing for performance at a specific time, a specific time and place, you know?
Mm. Yeah. Life periodization, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Question for you is, I guess, like, what we say is, or have been some of like the biggest shifts in your training philosophy in like maybe like the last like 20 years since like the 2003, right? Since that like first show. What do you think some of the kind of biggest changes within the training are? And then we can go into nutrition.
I've been through so many changes in in training and shifts, you know. Um, but you know, really, to be honest with you, I think the biggest shift for me personally was kind of something we've already talked about. Is detaching from the guy that was using all that load in the gym and kind of going to working smarter instead of harder. You know what I mean? And that shift was really kind of preempted by our good Eric Helms. He was watching me train on a pull down that I was doing right next door here. And at that point there, I'd kind of let go of load at that point, and I was trying to get a lot of repetitions in, because at that time my mind was thinking repetitions was volume, and it burns. And so I was trying to hurry up and get as many repetitions I could done in a set. You know what I mean? Well, obviously when you're doing that, many of those repetitions are not really, they don't really count. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he kind of called me out, and he says, you know, he says, I think that you're going to get a lot better response from your training if you just slow down that eccentric on those pull downs. You know, just let that come out a little bit slower, kind of go to a dead stop and make your back muscles get things going again. And I remember thinking at the time, well, I'm not doing that. That hurts. You know, it burns. It doesn't hurt in a bad way. It hurts in a good way, you know? But then just that shift of just thinking to myself, okay, now wait a minute. You know, I'm kind of fooling myself here, thinking that getting more repetitions in the same period of time, and trying to get more and more and more repetitions, kind of in a, I don't want to call it junk volume, but basically I was fooling myself. I was thinking that way was better by the numbers. Well, yeah, by the numbers it is. But when you look at and feel better quality work, and basically just better work on the intended muscle by doing less repetitions and doing it in a kind of a slower fashion, you kind of end up with a different number, but kind of the same end goal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a lot of times what was making me fail with the former of those two things was either A, I would just give up, you know what I mean, because the burn was happening, or I was just gassed, you know, I couldn't catch my breath. Whereas the latter of those two things, the muscle was actually giving out. You know, it wasn't me giving out, it wasn't me giving up, and it wasn't my cardiovascular conditioning that was stopping me. It was the actual muscle was failing, you know. I think that was the biggest shift, really, to be honest with you. And it kind of took a little bit of a smack in the side of the head to say, look, you're just fooling yourself here, bud. You're not actually improving, you know, because it would, like we talked about earlier, when you get on the bodybuilding stage, nobody cares how many repetitions you did. How does that muscle look, and how did you get that muscle is what it's after.
Yeah, that's it. There's literally zero substitute for hard work.
Mm-hmm.
What about nutrition?
You know, this has been kind of something that I guess has happened here in the more recent years since I've turned 50, and I'm over 50 now. Like you, there was a time I thought I was indestructible. You know what I mean? I don't have to eat my raw fruits and vegetables. I don't have to worry about my sugar intake. I don't have to worry about the kinds of fat that I've taken in. You know what I mean? And, you know, it's a very humbling experience when you find out, oh, you know what? I actually have cardiovascular disease and I have coronary artery disease in my heart. You know what I mean? Oh, you mean to tell me that I actually have, you know, this kind of cholesterol condition that I never knew that I had? And you kind of get this shift of like, well, you know what? Maybe I should have been paying attention to that 20 years ago, because now I have to. You know, so now it's kind of less about just the numbers, getting the calories in and making sure that my macros are all kind of dialed in and everything. I actually kind of have to think about things like the sources, you know, because there's a definite shift in my bad cholesterol when I am taking in lower saturated fats. You know what I mean? There's a definite shift there. When I'm getting all of my fats from, you know, butter, you know, and fried things and high fat, you know, kind of animal proteins, versus, you know, now I'm getting my fats from avocado and nut butter and, you know, lower fat animal proteins, things like that. That's real, you know.
Yeah,
LDL was 140, now it's 80.
yeah,
Those are the kind of things that I've kind of came to the realization of now, you know, because now it actually does matter. You know, if I don't keep that LDL in check, I'm gonna have a heart attack someday, because that plaque in my artery is just gonna get tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, you know.
mm,
And it makes me wish that I would have paid attention to those kind of things much, much, much sooner, because I mean, maybe it's a placebo, maybe it's just a side effect, but man, I since I've really started including a lot of my raw fruits and vegetables, dropping my saturated fat, arguably have dropped my sugar a good chunk. Man, I sure feel pretty darn good for a 54-year-old. Now, there's other factors that have probably contributed. I can't really isolate it to that. You know, my sleep
yeah,
is its best ever. My sleep hygiene, I really thrived from some coaching on Alberto on that. So it's probably multifaceted. You know, these different things that are kind of why I'm feeling so good at 54. But at least one of those facets was probably just kind of eating the way God intended us to. You know?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think like obviously, uh, like within nutrition, like and bodybuilding, what I was getting into it too, it was all about the it fits your macros, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, like when I was learning about that initially, you'd have people posting their like macro filler bowls at the end of the day and stuff like that, their concoctions they'd be making, and you know, you kind of look back at it in hindsight, and you're just like, we were just trying to find a way to like eat shit food, but like
Mm-hmm.
say, but like I don't know, kind of cope that was good for us because we were hitting these numbers, and then
Mm-hmm.
again you look back and it's like, yeah, we were just eating like children, really, you
Yeah.
know.
Or just trying to show off. Look at the crap that I can eat and
Yeah.
still get the result. You know?
And meanwhile, you're starving the entire day, and all you can think about the whole day is like having that bowl of food. So
Yeah.
it's like you think you're having a good time, but you're actually kind of miserable because you're just looking forward to this concoction at the end of the day. Um, having all the sweetener products and everything, like, Walden Farms, all over your oats and different things that Walden Farms should not be going into. But yeah, like I actually was speaking to Adam McDonald earlier. I thought, have you ever met Adam? Worked
I've
with,
never
yeah,
met Adam. Oh yes, yes. You
yeah.
know what? I have met Adam. Yes,
He did
it was a
most
long time
amazing.
ago, but I did have met Adam. Yeah.
Yeah, I had him on earlier, and like we were just talking about like things to help improve like longevity and health span. Like that's one thing like we were talking about was, people making that switch of like less animal fats for more plant fats, and like, including things like more fiber within the diet and everything like that to help improve people's like cholesterol levels. Because I think like what you bring up is like it's a fantastic point. Like you're somebody who's been training consistently for, fucking 3-4 decades, right? Like if you've been very active, like you for the most part would be looking as well after, calorie balance, but just due to maybe some source, like different sources chosen, and obviously maybe something like genetic, there was still like a buildup of like plaque within the arteries, and like that kind of led to some coronary heart disease. And yeah, like I think it's one of those things that people just you don't see it until you get a blood test, and because it's not something that is visible, people can easily brush it under the rug and say, "Oh well, I do train, I do my cardio, or I keep like an eye on my calorie intake," and it's like there's just more levels to it. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. And like, yeah, I think with obviously Ireland's like food regulations and food advice is kind of is completely different to what the States is now. But I, kind of seeing some of the push in, from RFK's like administration to tell people to eat more butter and eat more bacon. I don't think it's going to be doing a lot of people any favors because they're just probably going to continue on that path, and heart disease is probably not going to go anywhere anytime fast, unless they decide they're actually going to bring out a solution. They're going to bring out a special drug that they can sell to everybody for
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for a fine price.
Yeah. 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 That's another topic that's probably out of our scope of
Yeah,
expertise.
absolutely. Like public health is definitely not my remit, but I just wanted to touch on like the impact of like changing up the food sources and how that can improve
Exactly.
your quality of life. Because one thing that's also happening alongside that is like if you're shifting from some of those sources that potentially driving up things like LDL, and you're switching for more kind of plant oriented fat sources, more fruits and vegetables, you're also getting like more raw materials into your body, right? You're getting more micronutrients, and the way I've always viewed it is when we have more micronutrients, macronutrients work better, our organs work better. There's all the like, aspects of like cellular metabolism that use a lot of the vitamins and minerals, coenzymes, cofactors to process more efficiently. It's like the analogy I like to use is like in a workplace, the manager can realistically do the job of the employees, but the manager's job and fulfilling their task is so much more easy when they have all their employees going to work. Now, if the employees don't show up to work, the manager is still able to fulfill the roles. He's able to get them done, but there's a big backlog. Now, that's the way I like to think about like vitamins and minerals working. Like vitamins and minerals, they're the likes of employees. The macros they're the managers. And like if we have the whole force showing up to work, cool, we're going to work a lot more efficiently. We're going to get stuff done. But people start showing up late. People start not coming in. All this stuff still needs to get done, but there's a backlog. And when there's a backlog, things start to go sideways.
Yeah.
That might take a day. That might take a week. Might take a month. But like it eventually will kind of show up on your doorstep.
Yep. And it always attacks the weakest spot, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
So yeah, wherever the weak link is, that's where it's going to go.
So, Brad, have you got any plans for competing this year, or are you going to maybe hold off until
I'm
2027?
probably not going to do any bodybuilding for a while. But I do, I've had a new competitive avenue open up now that I'm 50.
Yeah, yeah.
No longer do I have to compete with those really freaking strong guys like you in the open. I can kind of compete against other 50-year-olds and and they've got a very big push right now in both USAPL and then also in the States, Powerlifting America. That's the IPF affiliate. There's a very big push for masters lifters. They're doing last year, they did the Mr. Olympia Masters Challenge that I competed in. And I mean, God kind of gave me a little bit of an extra dose of competitiveness, and I really love to compete. And so I'm going to do USAPL Raw Nationals this year because it looks like there is a very, I'm not going to say overly competitive, but there's a well-attended M2 group that's going to be there. Now, we're all going to be competing for second place because my client, Dave Brown, is arguably the pound for pound strongest master lifter on the planet. And he's going to beat us all with his last warm up in the back room. But I'm going to do more powerlifting now that I can compete against other 50-year-old powerlifters. And they have competitions that use the dot scores so that they can kind of level the playing field. And you can kind of compete against 50-year-olds in other weight classes as well. I love competition. I really do. And I love training for competition. You know what I mean? Because ultimately competition, it is what it is. Sometimes you don't do your best, but you won anyway. You just did what you had to do to win. And so in order to compete, you got to be there. And so I love the training aspect of getting ready for competition as well. So I kind of get to feed both worlds. I get to feed that extra competitive dose that God gave me, and then I get to kind of treat my training, as somebody that's getting ready to compete.
Mm, yeah, for sure. And I guess it's less anguish to your soul as well, not having to get down to like fucking 3% body fat.
Yes, getting down to that fragile state, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sure. Like, I guess like now that you've got a bit older, like, have you noticed like more negative side effects of like getting into that stage condition relative to like when we were in your when you're in your
Um,
30s?
yeah, that's a good question. It doesn't feel any different, really. I think I feel a little more fragile physically, but I'm so much just wiser and smarter about my training approach anymore.
Yeah,
Back in the day, in the early 2000 teens and late kind of 2000s, I wouldn't sleep very good. I was kind of always at that mindset. I'll sleep when I'm dead. I got work to do. Like we said, I was not arguably as good on my nutrition as I should have been. Not as smart with my training. I would just kind of really focus on load, 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 and I probably um, didn't do myself any favors there. I think if I was doing that now, I would definitely feel different. And that would probably not get me on the stage. But because I'm so much smarter about how I do things, and I know how to um, pull the right levers to get my sleep to work better. I know the things that I need to do to kind of get the same effect while making it less harsh on myself. Um, it arguably maybe even made me feel maybe not even really the same as before, but maybe even just a little bit better. Plus the awareness is there. It's just kind of like, yeah, I'm grumpy. Deal with it. Whereas before it would be like, I'm grumpy, the world's coming to an end.
yeah. That's the life experience and the wisdom. I guess like obviously your father. Like, how many kids have you got?
Just one, right? Yeah, just
One,
one.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So like, obviously, once you have a kid, and like he's gone to like university and stuff now, hasn't he?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So like, you've been through something that's probably harder than any bodybuilding prep will be, which is like raising a good
Another
kid.
human. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it puts it in perspective. I think like I'm not a father yet, but like any father that I've talked to, whether it be bodybuilding prep, powerlifting prep, you know, it really puts in perspective the shit that you complain about when you're like in your early 20s, whether it's like I'm a little bit hungry or I'm a little bit grumpy, is like, Well, you don't have a choice to be grumpy now because you have to feed a baby.
Yeah.
Shut
Yeah.
your moaning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Brad, really, really appreciate your time this evening. I just want to finish it off with like maybe one question, bit of an introspective one. Um, what keeps you lifting? What keeps you like in the gym training?
Gosh, I mean, so much. I love doing it. It's genuinely fun, to get in there and do things that um maybe I didn't necessarily thought I was going to be doing when I was 54.
Mm.
Maybe when I was younger, I kind of thought that would be kind of just a phase that I went through and I wouldn't be doing it later. I mean, it does feel good to be strong. It kind of feels good to be that 54-year-old guy that can, you know, throw 3 plates on a bar and squat it. That's kind of
Yeah.
something that's a little bit rare. And that's not something that you can fake. You know what I mean? That's not something that I can just take time away from and then boom, let's go back and do it again. I gotta work to be able to do that. Um, I mean, it makes my life better, you know? Things that seem hard in life, they seem less hard, you know, because you've kind of been through all of those hard things that kind of hurt in a good way at times, you know.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know what kind of a person I'd be if I didn't have those kind of things in my life. You know what I mean? Um, yeah, there's actually quite a bit, to be honest with you, that keeps me in the gym and keeps me at it. And I mean, I don't think you could peel it away from me, to be honest with you. I think you'd have to pry it out of my cold, dead hand in order to keep me from doing it because of all of the positive aspects that come from it, not only in the weight room and in my competitive desires, but just in life in general. It suits a guy like me who kind of needs to have something to sharpen against.
Yeah, a lot of intrinsic drive, and that's something that, time and time again you hear of what is the main determinant of somebody being adherent or sticking to something over the long term, and it usually is that like the goal of training has more meaning than just like a physical outcome,
How
like
you look. Yeah.
how
Yeah.
you look. Because yeah, I think while a lot of us probably get into it for that reason, it's not the reason why a lot of us stay, So,
Hmm. Hmm.
Brad, thank you so much for your time this evening. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
Go to 3dmusclejourney.com. That's probably the most well-known place. I mean, me, myself, if you just look up 3DMJ Coach, you'll probably find me. That's kind of like my little brand, I guess you might say. 3DMJ Coach on Instagram, 3DMJ Coach on X. That's usually me. So
Awesome. Right. I will I'll link all of Brad's his Instagram and then like obviously 3DMJ YouTube podcast and everything. Because you're essentially like the host of the 3DMJ podcast, right?
we
You're
take turns. We take
yeah,
turns, but
yeah.
oftentimes I do end up kind of taking the role on. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, you do a good job. All right. So yeah, I'll leave it in the description. If you did enjoy the podcast, please do give us a rate and review of the podcast. Go over, give Brad a follow and follow his journey and keep an eye on him to make sure he doesn't injure himself again. And yeah, other than that, we will chat very soon.